The morning sun cast long shadows across the grand hallways of Buckingham Palace as Queen Camilla walked slowly toward the private drawing room. Her steps echoed against the marble floors, each sound seeming louder than usual in the unusual quiet of the palace. Today was different from any other day in her life as queen consort. For weeks, whispers had been circulating through the palace corridors. The staff spoke in hushed tones about secret meetings, urgent phone calls, and documents being passed between advisors late into the night. Camilla had noticed the change in atmosphere, but she never imagined it would lead to this moment. King Charles sat behind his mahogany desk, surrounded by papers and official documents. His face showed the weight of recent decisions, lines deeper than they had been just months ago when he first took the throne. The crown, which had once seemed to fit him perfectly, now appeared to rest heavily upon his head even when he wasn't wearing it. "My dear," Charles began, his voice softer than usual, "we need to discuss the future of our reign." Camilla took her seat across from him, her hands folded in her lap. She had been queen consort for less than 2 years, yet she felt as though she had lived a lifetime in the role. The constant public scrutiny, the endless ceremonies, and the pressure to be perfect had taken their toll on both of them. "The Parliament has been pressuring me," Charles continued, shuffling through the papers on his desk. "They believe that for the sake of the monarchy's future, certain changes need to be made." Outside the windows, the palace gardens were in full bloom. Camilla remembered how excited she had been to plan the garden parties, to host charitable events, and to support causes close to her heart. But the political landscape had shifted dramatically since Charles's coronation, and public opinion had become increasingly divided. The Prime Minister had visited the palace 3 times in the past week alone. Each meeting had been longer than the last, and Charles had emerged from each one looking more troubled. The press had been relentless in their coverage of every royal decision, questioning everything from state expenses to the monarchy's relevance in modern Britain. "What kind of changes?" Camilla asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Charles stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the gardens where tourists gathered beyond the palace gates. "They want me to rule alone, at least for a while. They believe it would strengthen public confidence and help stabilize the institution." The words hung in the air between them like a heavy curtain. Camilla had always known that her position as queen consort was different from that of previous queens. The public had never fully embraced her the way they had embraced others before her, and the media had never stopped reminding everyone of the complicated history that had led to her marriage to Charles. "They want me to step aside," she said quietly, not as a question but as a statement of fact. Charles turned back to face her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resignation. "Temporarily, they say, until things settle down and the public becomes more accepting." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, marking the passage of time that seemed to move both too quickly and too slowly. Camilla thought about all the royal duties she had taken on, all the charities she had supported, and all the people she had met who had genuinely appreciated her work. "And if I refuse?" she asked. Charles returned to his seat, leaning forward with his hands clasped together. "Then we face the possibility of a constitutional crisis. Parliament could withdraw their support, and the future of the monarchy itself could be at risk." The weight of responsibility that came with the crown was something Camilla had learned to carry. But this was different. This wasn't about personal sacrifice for the good of the country. This was about political maneuvering and public perception. "There's more," Charles said, reaching for a thick folder on his desk. "The advisors have prepared a plan for your temporary retreat from public duties. You would retain your title but step back from all official engagements. They've suggested you could focus on private charitable work, perhaps spend time at Highgrove or one of the other estates." Camilla listened as he outlined the details of her proposed exile. It would be presented to the public as a voluntary decision, a desire to focus on family and personal interests rather than a forced removal from her position. The palace would issue statements about her continued support for the king and her dedication to the crown, even from behind the scenes. "How long?" she asked. "They haven't specified," Charles admitted. "It could be months, or it could be years. It depends on how public opinion shifts and whether the political situation stabilizes." As the morning progressed, more advisors joined their meeting. Each brought additional papers, more statistics about public approval ratings, and fresh reports from political analysts. The consensus was clear. For the monarchy to survive the current political climate, Queen Camilla needed to disappear from public view. The irony was not lost on either of them. Charles had waited his entire life to become king, and now, less than 2 years into his reign, he was being asked to sacrifice the woman he loved for the sake of the crown. Camilla had never sought the spotlight, but she had grown into her role with grace and dedication, only to be told that her presence was now a liability. By midday, the palace was buzzing with activity as staff members were quietly informed of the impending changes. Press secretaries began drafting statements, security teams started planning for modified protection details, and household managers began preparing for a significant reduction in official events. Camilla spent the afternoon in her private study, looking through photo albums from her time as queen consort. There were pictures from state dinners, charity galas, garden parties, and foreign visits. In each image, she could see her own growth and increasing confidence in the role that was now being taken away from her. The decision, though presented as temporary, felt permanent in its implications. Once a queen consort stepped aside due to political pressure, the precedent would be set for future interference in royal marriages and appointments. The monarchy would be forever changed, becoming more susceptible to the whims of popular opinion and political calculation. As evening approached, Camilla and Charles shared what might be their last dinner together as king and queen consort. The dining room, usually filled with guests and formal conversation, was quiet except for the soft clinking of silverware against china. "When do they expect this to happen?" Camilla asked as they finished their meal. "The announcement is scheduled for next week," Charles replied. "They want to coordinate it with a major policy speech I'm giving to Parliament, something about the future direction of the monarchy. The next few days would be their last as a royal couple in the public eye." Soon, Charles would stand alone at state functions, attend meetings without his queen consort by his side, and face the challenges of modern monarchy with only his advisors and staff for support. That night, as Camilla prepared for bed, she looked out her bedroom window at the lights of London stretching into the distance. Somewhere out there, millions of people were living their lives, unaware that their queen was about to disappear from public view. Some would celebrate the news when it was announced, while others might feel sympathy for a woman caught in the crossfire of politics and tradition. The palace felt different already, as if the very walls knew that change was coming. Staff members moved more quietly through the corridors, and even the usual bustle of preparation for upcoming events seemed subdued. Everyone sensed that they were witnessing the end of an era, even if they didn't fully understand what would come next. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the formal precision that characterized all major royal communications. Press Secretary Margaret Thornton stood at the podium in the palace briefing room, her voice steady as she read from the carefully prepared statement. "Her Majesty Queen Camilla has decided to step back from her public duties to focus on private, charitable endeavors and family commitments. This decision reflects her desire to support His Majesty the King in a more personal capacity during this important period in the monarchy's evolution." The questions from reporters came immediately, sharp and probing. Why now? Was the Queen ill? Had there been pressure from Parliament? Margaret deflected each inquiry with practiced diplomatic language, but the skepticism in the room was palpable. Within hours, the news had spread across the globe. Television networks interrupted their regular programming to discuss the unprecedented move. Royal experts debated the implications, while political commentators speculated about the real reasons behind Camilla's withdrawal. Social media exploded with reactions ranging from celebration to outrage. At Highgrove House, Camilla watched the coverage from the comfort of her favorite armchair in the morning room. The reporters standing outside the palace gates looked so serious, so convinced of their own understanding of palace politics. None of them knew about the tears Charles had shed the night before or the way his hands had trembled as he signed the official papers authorizing her departure. The first few days of her new life passed quietly. Without the constant schedule of engagements, Camilla found herself with an abundance of time she hadn't experienced in years. She walked through the gardens, read books that had been gathering dust on her nightstand, and tried to adjust to the strange sensation of being invisible again. Charles called every evening, his voice carefully controlled during their conversations. He told her about his day, about the meetings and ceremonies that continued without her. He never mentioned how empty the palace felt, or how the staff had started avoiding the rooms where she used to work. He didn't need to. She could hear it in the spaces between his words. "The garden party preparations are going well," he reported during one call. Though the guest list is smaller than usual, Camilla understood. Social events would be more subdued without a queen consort to serve as hostess. The delicate balance of royal entertaining, which she had mastered over months of practice, would now fall entirely to Charles and the senior staff. Meanwhile, in London, the political ramifications of her departure were becoming clear. Parliament members who had pushed for her removal were now facing criticism from unexpected quarters. Several prominent charitable organizations issued statements expressing disappointment about losing their royal patron. International dignitaries began asking questions about protocol for future state visits. The Prime Minister, who had been instrumental in orchestrating Camilla's withdrawal, found himself defending the decision in increasingly hostile interviews. The monarchy must adapt to serve the people's best interests, he repeated whenever questioned about the government's role in royal affairs, but adaptation was proving more complicated than anyone had anticipated. The palace staff struggled to reorganize their procedures around a single monarch. Events that had been planned months in advance required complete restructuring. Foreign ambassadors expressed confusion about proper etiquette when only the king would be present for important ceremonies. King Charles himself was discovering the challenges of ruling without his partner's support. During a state dinner for visiting European leaders, he found himself managing conversations alone that would have been much easier with Camilla's natural social skills. She had always been gifted at putting people at ease, at finding common ground between diverse personalities. "Your Majesty seems somewhat overwhelmed," observed the French ambassador during a private moment between courses. Charles forced a smile. "Simply adjusting to new arrangements," he replied diplomatically. But privately, he was struggling more than he cared to admit. The loneliness of leadership had always been offset by Camilla's presence at his side. Now, surrounded by advisors and staff but without his closest confidant, he felt the full weight of his position in ways he hadn't before. Public opinion, which had driven the decision to remove Camilla, was proving to be as fickle as the advisors had feared. Initial polls showed support for her departure, but as weeks passed without any dramatic improvement in the monarchy's popularity, questions began to arise about whether the sacrifice had been worth it. A group of women's organizations issued a joint statement criticizing the decision as fundamentally unfair to someone who had served with dignity. Queen Camilla was fulfilling her duties admirably, their letter stated. Her removal sets a dangerous precedent about the treatment of royal women. Religious leaders also began speaking out. The Archbishop of Canterbury, who had officiated at Charles and Camilla's blessing ceremony years earlier, made carefully worded comments about the importance of marital unity in times of crisis. His words carried weight in a country where the monarch served as head of the Church of England. At Highgrove, Camilla tried to create a new routine. She worked in her garden, wrote letters to friends and family, and maintained correspondence with several of her former charities. But the isolation was difficult to bear. For months, her days had been filled with purpose and public service. Now, despite the peaceful surroundings, she felt adrift. Her security detail had been reduced to the bare minimum required for someone of her status. The team of personal assistants who had managed her schedule was reassigned to other royal duties. Even her lady-in-waiting visited less frequently, having taken on additional responsibilities at the palace. The media attention, rather than fading as expected, seemed to intensify. Photographers with long lenses camped outside the estate gates, hoping to capture images of the exiled queen. Tabloid newspapers ran daily speculation about her mental state, her marriage, and her future plans. Camilla's lonely exile read one particularly dramatic headline, accompanied by a grainy photo of her walking alone in her garden. Charles was furious about the continued intrusion but powerless to stop it. His position required him to remain above such controversies, even when they involved his wife's privacy and dignity. The political calculation that had seemed so clear just weeks earlier was becoming muddied by unexpected consequences. Members of Parliament who had supported Camilla's removal now found themselves answering uncomfortable questions from constituents who wondered whether the government had overstepped its bounds in royal affairs. International observers were also taking note. The decision to sideline a queen consort due to political pressure was unprecedented in modern British history. Constitutional scholars debated whether it represented a dangerous erosion of royal independence or a necessary evolution of democratic monarchy. In private conversations with trusted friends, Charles expressed growing doubts about the wisdom of the decision. "I fear we may have damaged something that cannot be easily repaired," he confided to his longtime friend and advisor, Sir Michael. "Your Majesty did what was necessary for the crown's survival," Sir Michael replied, but his words carried less conviction than they had weeks earlier. The palace's daily operations continued, but the absence of the Queen Consort created gaps that were becoming increasingly apparent. Diplomatic wives accustomed to being received by both monarchs now found their protocol unclear. Charitable events lost their previous warmth and personal touch. The royal household, carefully balanced for decades around a partnership model, struggled to function efficiently with half of its leadership structure removed. As autumn approached, bringing with it the traditional season of royal engagements and state occasions, the true cost of Camilla's absence would become even more apparent. The monarchy, in trying to preserve itself through sacrifice, had discovered that some changes could not be easily undone. Winter arrived early at Highgrove House, bringing with it a bitter cold that seemed to seep through even the thick stone walls. Camilla stood at her bedroom window watching the frost form delicate patterns on the glass, each crystal a reminder of the isolation that had become her daily reality. 6 months had passed since her withdrawal from public life, and the temporary arrangement was beginning to feel disturbingly permanent. The palace had stopped providing regular updates about her eventual return. Phone calls from Charles had become shorter and less frequent, filled with careful words that revealed nothing about the growing pressure he faced to make her absence official. The morning brought news that would change everything. Margaret Thornton arrived at Highgrove unannounced, her usual diplomatic composure replaced by obvious urgency. She carried with her a leather briefcase containing documents that would reshape the royal landscape once again. "Your Majesty," Margaret began, settling into the chair across from Camilla in the morning room. "We need to discuss some developments in London." The opinion polls that had initially supported Camilla's removal had shifted dramatically. A series of royal events without the Queen Consort had been widely criticized as cold and impersonal. The state visit from the Japanese emperor had been particularly awkward, with diplomatic wives expressing disappointment about the reduced protocol and social program. More significantly, a group of influential conservative MPs had begun questioning the precedent set by government interference in royal marriages. Lord Hamilton, a respected constitutional expert, had written a scathing article in the Times arguing that Parliament had overstepped its authority and damaged the independence of the monarchy. "Public sympathy has swung considerably," Margaret reported, opening her briefcase to reveal newspaper clippings and polling data. "There's growing sentiment that the decision was hasty and unfair, but the most dramatic development had occurred just 2 days earlier. During a routine parliamentary session, the opposition leader had stood to deliver an unexpected speech about the treatment of Queen Camilla. Her words had been measured but devastating, pointing out the hypocrisy of a government that claimed to support women's equality while forcing a queen to abandon her duties due to political convenience. "The Prime Minister's position has become untenable," Margaret continued. "His own party members are distancing themselves from the decision. There's talk of a vote of no confidence if the situation isn't resolved soon." The irony was not lost on anyone involved. The political maneuvering that had forced Camilla into exile was now threatening to destroy the very government that had orchestrated it. The Prime Minister, who had insisted her removal was necessary for stability, was discovering that her continued absence was creating even greater instability. At Buckingham Palace, King Charles was dealing with his own crisis. The loneliness of his position had become unbearable, affecting his ability to fulfill his duties with the warmth and personal connection that the public expected. His recent speeches had been criticized as wooden and disconnected. State dinners had become stiff, formal affairs that lacked the gracious hospitality that had characterized previous royal entertaining. The breaking point came during a meeting with the Commonwealth representatives. The High Commissioner from Australia asked directly about Queen Camilla's absence, noting that several Commonwealth nations had expressed concern about the implications for their own constitutional monarchies. "Your Majesty," the representative said carefully, "our governments are struggling to explain to our citizens why a queen consort can be removed due to political pressure. It raises questions about the independence of the crown that we hadn't anticipated." That evening, Charles made a decision that would have been unthinkable months earlier. He called an emergency meeting with his closest advisors and announced his intention to restore Camilla to her full role as queen consort, regardless of political consequences. "The monarchy cannot survive as an institution if it becomes subject to the changing whims of popular opinion," he declared. "We've sacrificed our principles for temporary political advantage, and the result has been disastrous." Sir Michael, who had reluctantly supported the original decision, now found himself in the uncomfortable position of agreeing with his monarch's reversal. The practical difficulties of running royal operations without a queen consort had become increasingly apparent. More importantly, the damage to the monarchy's reputation from appearing weak and politically manipulated was proving worse than any criticism Camilla's presence had generated. The announcement of Camilla's return was carefully orchestrated to maximize political impact. Rather than a simple palace statement, Charles chose to address the nation directly, in a televised speech from the throne room. His words were measured but firm, acknowledging the difficulties of recent months while asserting the independence and dignity of the crown. The monarchy serves the people of this nation, but it cannot serve them effectively if it becomes a political football, he said, looking directly into the camera. Queen Camilla has my full confidence and support, and she will resume her duties as my partner in service to this great nation. The public response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Polls taken in the hours following the announcement showed a dramatic spike in approval for both Charles and Camilla. The restoration of the royal partnership appeared to restore public confidence in the monarchy as an institution. More importantly, the decision had immediate practical benefits. Diplomatic wives who had expressed concern about protocol uncertainties welcomed the news. Charitable organizations that had lost their royal patron began making plans for renewed partnerships. The palace staff, who had struggled to maintain their usual standards with reduced leadership, breathed collective sighs of relief. The Prime Minister, faced with the collapse of his political position, announced his resignation the following day. His final statement acknowledged that the government had made an error in forcing royal family changes for political reasons. The independence of the monarchy is fundamental to our constitutional system, he admitted. We lost sight of that principle in our desire to respond to temporary political pressures. Camilla's return to public life was marked by a carefully planned series of engagements designed to demonstrate the strength and unity of the royal partnership. Her first public appearance, at a charity event for military families, was met with enthusiastic applause from both attendees and the media. The experience had changed both Charles and Camilla in profound ways. Their partnership, tested by unprecedented political pressure, had emerged stronger than before. They had learned painful lessons about the fragility of constitutional traditions and the importance of maintaining royal independence. The palace operations, disrupted for months by the absence of the queen consort, quickly returned to their previous efficiency. But the institutional memory of the crisis remained, serving as a reminder of how quickly political calculations could threaten the stability of the monarchy itself. In her first interview following her return, Camilla spoke carefully but pointedly about the experience. The crown must serve the people, she said, but it cannot serve them if it becomes subject to political manipulation. The independence of the monarchy is not a luxury. It's a necessity for the health of our democracy. The constitutional scholars who had criticized the original decision praised the restoration as a return to proper royal protocol. The precedent of government interference in royal appointments had been decisively rejected, strengthening the monarchy's position for future generations. As winter gave way to spring, the crisis that had threatened to reshape the British monarchy permanently was becoming a historical footnote. But its lessons remained fresh in the minds of all involved. The crown had survived by remembering its fundamental independence, and the royal partnership had proven stronger than the political forces that had tried to break it apart. The gardens at Buckingham Palace bloomed with renewed vigor that spring, tended by a queen who had learned the true cost of public service, and a king who had discovered that some sacrifices demand too high a price. Together, they faced the future with a deeper understanding of their roles and a renewed commitment to the principles that had sustained the monarchy through centuries of change.